welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us today. And my name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as usual, by Josh Sullivan. Welcome
Hello.
to you, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Matt. So I always like to plan ahead, think ahead, and I notice, looking at my calendar today, that we're just less than 2 weeks away from the beginning of Lent.
Lent has started really late this year, right?
Yeah.
We got to normally, this is because I'm thinking Easter, but normally I've got 2 or 3 weeks of a semester after Easter. So I was going to plan that right between okay, go home and study for Easter and then come back and we're going to give exams. But now exams are before Easter, which is really going to be nice for all my students to come home and go home and not have to worry about it and enjoy the Easter weekend. But it sucks for me because I'll be marking.
Yeah, I don't know if it's late this year or if it was really early last year. Last year was really early.
Yeah.
Easter was March 31st last year.
Yeah,
that's early.
That's early.
Yeah. This year it's April 20th, so Lent starts in less than 2 weeks on March 5th. And you know what? I must say, I love the season of Lent.
Yeah.
I really love Lent. It's like, I always find it's like the season of the church where Catholics really try and take seriously. You know
when you go to a dentist, and this is going to sound like a weird, but when you go to a dentist and you brush your teeth a lot, but then they come in and they pick and they clean your teeth, and all of a sudden
find more stuff.
They find more stuff, but you also you start to feel your teeth, and you're like, that's really sharp. Oh, that's you could tell they did a really good job cleaning that you maybe haven't done. I feel like that's Lent. You know what I mean? Like I go to confession. I go to confession.
Like a good toothpick.
I think I appreciated Lent a lot more before your
Analogy?
analogy. Yeah.
But I think that's like
Lent
one of the
is
times.
like going to the dentist.
Yeah.
It's when you go and you come out and you're like, there's a difference here. I really understand now. This is something that I didn't recognize it because it just fell into my regular everyday routine. I didn't realize how much I needed to floss more than I was flossing before, or how much
I'm like feeling my teeth now. Like,
you're feeling it on the back.
Did I brush enough today?
Everyone does.
But honestly, it's like you think of like Christmas, okay? You think of Christmas season, and it's like a great joy that Christ is born, and then people are so occupied by their routine and their celebration and their Christmas shopping and their cooking and all that stuff that it's like, okay, we go to mass, and then it's like that's about it, and then you think of even the Advent season, it's almost like a countdown to Christmas.
Yeah.
But then Lent is like a time when people are like, no, I have to give something up. Like I have to do something for 40 days. And I really applaud that. Now, whether people last the 40 days or not, I'm not sure. But people, I think, at least approach Lent with this desire to do something to improve their spiritual life, which I really appreciate.
I think as humans, we actually, there's a redemptive quality, a redemptive suffering, or a quality of suffering that we enjoy. For instance, what I mean by that, the worst canoe trips I've ever been on are the ones I'm most proud of. You know what I mean? The things that everything have gone wrong, the things that I didn't have a paddle and I had to make one out of wood that I found, or all those horror stories that you would hate. My best story is that we forgot all of our food, so we survived 3 or 4 days with just we had beer. So we remembered the beer and eggs that was in the cooler with the beer, but that's all we had. So we had to figure out how to survive for 4 days in the bush with. Anyways, those suffering, but at the same time we came out of it, and it's a story that I'm very proud of. So I think Lent is very similar. You know what I mean? We go into this. Okay, this is something I'm going to conquer. This is something I'm going to establish. I'm going to do this, and it's hard sometimes, and it's something that really kind of bogs us down. But when we get on the other side of it, we get over the hill, and we come into Easter, we're like, yeah, we did it. If we made it,
Yeah, and I really love the when you go to mass during Lent, it's like the church is bare.
Yeah,
and it's it really sets the tone. It's like you're everything's purple and penitential, everything's empty, and you just feel okay, we're stripping everything away, and we're together. We're really it's like all the Catholics are unified on this
Journey.
and like Ash Wednesday when everyone's marked on the forehead, and you stop at the corner store and you're like, hey, like, oh, there's a fellow Catholic or whatever it is. It's like Lent is like we're all moving towards the resurrection. It's a beautiful thing. Why we're talking about that today is because I really believe that the best Lent is one that we're prepared for. So that's why, in 13 days from now, when we start Ash Wednesday, like Lent begins.
Yeah.
Ash Wednesday is not the day to start thinking about what you're going to do for Lent. Like we have a plan. We have a plan. Like think about Shrove Tuesday. People always stuff themselves with pancakes and all these things like that. Empty the fridges, all that stuff. It's like because Lent begins on Ash Wednesday.
That's right.
And so let's prepare ourselves. And I think this year, what might be worth reflecting on for people if you're listening at home for Lent this year is to reflect on where you're spending your time. And I think that's really important for us because sometimes I think every year we're like, well, okay, it's my annual time to give up coffee or my annual time to give up chocolate or sweets or whatever it is. But I think remember that our sacrifice for Lent is supposed to improve our spiritual life. It's supposed to do something to deepen our faith, to add a little depthness there. So if we're just giving up sweets, what is that doing for our spiritual life?
Yeah.
Right? It might do something for our waistline.
Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing, right? But it's not really improving our spiritual life. So what can we do to sacrifice something this season of Lent that's going to improve our spiritual life? And I want to look at where we're spending our time. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that people do with their time that I don't know, maybe people think that, that's silly to give up or whatever. So I think it's wise to look at maybe how much time people are spending on certain things. Let's first of all look at hobbies.
Yeah.
Okay? Because when I talk about how you spend your time, people are thinking like, oh, of course the priest is talking about stuff like wasting your time, like social media or scrolling or things that aren't good for you, or whatever. I'm talking about more like, are we living a balanced Christian life? Like, are we living a disciplined life with Jesus? And that is really important, I think. I think people maybe don't, I don't know. I don't want to speak for everyone here, but I think we're really good at coming to Mass on Sunday, and we're really good at worshiping.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the week, we kind of start off strong Monday, Tuesday, and then we kind of slip down because we're not balancing our time. We're not giving God his due portion of our time. So I want to start with hobbies a little bit because I think everyone should have hobbies. I think everyone should have something on the go for them, something to use their creativity. Remember, God has given us beautiful things, beautiful gifts, beautiful talents. We got to use them, right? Like Matt, I know you like to work woodworking, things like that, like beautiful things, right? I'm going to use you as an example. Like if you spent hours and hours a day woodworking, making things, and you make beautiful things. All of a sudden, not only are you neglecting your wife and your children, but you're neglecting your spiritual life as well, right? Yeah. And I think to look at how we spend our time, even with things that are good, to try and find the balance there. Think of people who tinker around in the garage. Yeah. Think of people who are always, crossing off something on the to-do list at their home. All really good things. Yeah. Right? But I think some of those things can really overtake our natural flow of life and impede on our spiritual life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying about, and you're saying this off camera as well, and maybe as a counterpoint to
don't repeat everything I say off camera.
to your camping story, that is like Lent is something that we want to be prepared for. So like having a 2-week time horizon, like you were saying that like you don't want to find out from your pastor on the Sunday Mass. So, Ash Wednesday is
2 days away.
Yeah, and you're like, I have to make a plan quickly for that. Like even now, like looking at the areas of your life, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your resources? What are the patterns of behavior? What am I doing in my leisure time? Because like as you're saying, like it's reasonable that we have periods of rest in our lives. I think like as kind of Western, kind of North American people, we expect a lot more leisure from life than than is maybe good for us sometimes. But again, even good hobbies, even good forms of leisure, if taken to excess, if demanding resources beyond, what we have available, or where those resources are better spent. I think having that opportunity, having a good time horizon leading up to Lent, allows us to look at our behaviors, look at where we're spending our time, and say, okay, even if this is a good form of rest, a good form of leisure, is it something that I can maybe give up? Is it something that I can maybe reorder towards something good?
And I think, like you're saying, reorder is the key word here. Is why are you doing what you're doing? And as you said, I think there's two different ways that we look at things. Sometimes we use rest, as you suggest, and sometimes we might be too accustomed to rest, if that makes sense, where we're getting too lazy behind the screens. And you mentioned social media. I think that's a big thing for people to look at.
Sure.
Especially in a certain age group, I think a lot of times we can falter to that. And it wasn't until I turned off social media, I got off all social media, that I realized how much time a day I was actually tuning into social media or drifting off a conversation into social media on my phone. And so I encourage people to look at that, but also specifically the opposite way too sometimes is you're too busy. And you kind of mentioned that too, is going the opposite way is you're too busy because you can't rest, or you don't want to rest, and so how are you having good times of rest, and what's the productivity in the rest, I guess, is one of the ways that I have to look at it. For instance, I love playing video games. That's one of my vices, I'm going to say. But at the same time, it can also be a time where I connect with my brother, my cousins, and we have good social stuff. But if I'm not just sitting there droning out into a video game and what I'm doing in the video game and all that kind of stuff, it can be a real, it's maybe not productive or healthy. But if it's a time where I'm playing with my kids and all four of my kids are with myself, we're playing video games together and we're communicating, we're laughing, we're having fun, then the game, it's not about the game, it's about spending time with us as a family and good quality time as a family versus just droning out by myself behind a video game. And so looking at, and as you suggested, like the orderly to the disorderly. So disorderly is taking the time for myself and just droning out, but then taking the time and making it about something healthy, something happy, something fun, where I actually get something out of a restful feeling out of it,
Yeah.
So,
I kind of, if I can, just kind of pick up, even the fact that you referred to video games as one of your vices.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that prevents us from taking due periods of rest is a feeling of guilt. Is a
Yeah,
feeling
good
of
call,
like, no,
good
I
call.
have so many things to do that I can't take this time to rest. And you'll encounter those people, like something like video games, and we have other things on our list.
Yeah.
TV, think about TV 30 years ago or something. You'll have those people just these are intrinsically disordered. These are always a waste of time. These are, why are you sitting in front of the television? Why are you? But as you're saying that, the medium itself isn't necessarily disordered, isn't inherently ordered as well. There's a lot of junk in video games, but there is a proper attitude that we can approach these hobbies.
That's right.
And I think you gave a great example. That's social gaming is much more edifying and valuable than me sitting in my room as a teenager for
grinding of missions,
days on end.
Trying
That's isolating me from my community, from my family, those types of things. So I think taking a look at not just the medium itself, but what is an ordered approach to these hobbies, and what are some of the disordered things that I should definitely avoid, and with the kind of pretext of heading into Lent, you're just examining your own habits, your own behaviors, and be okay, is this contributing to my own spiritual growth?
Yeah.
Is this
Exactly, and that's why I don't think it's good to just say oh well, certain times for video games is great, certain times of video games is not great. I think first and foremost we have to see where are my priorities. If the biggest excuse I hear all the time when people say, well, my prayer life hasn't been very good lately, I haven't had time.
Yeah.
I haven't had time to pray. And that kind of comment, while maybe true, someone just says, I just don't have time for prayer, that indicates something that's off in someone's schedule.
Yeah.
Because let's say a whole week has gone by and someone hasn't prayed at home. My first question is always well, did you eat anything this week? Well, people would laugh. You know,
You found time for eating.
Did you shower at all this week?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you talk to your wife at all this week? Did you like all those things? It's like, okay, well, you did those things because you prioritized them over others, right? And you see those things as necessities to continue, functioning.
Yeah.
But as Christians, we have to see our prayer as necessary to continue functioning.
Yeah.
We have to see it as spiritual food. If we're going to make time for lunch or time for dinner or whatever, if we're going to make time to wind down, as people say, and pour a glass of wine or scroll through Facebook or play a video game or whatever it might be, like, have we made time for our spiritual life?
And this is one of those things that I'm going to suggest. I hear a lot of people say things like, well, I pray all the time. Like
My life is my prayer. My work is my prayer.
I pray through everything I do. Yeah. But I'm going to challenge that, and I'm going to say, and while that is a good thing, and that's a good holy approach to offer up everything in prayer, have you actually sat down and had a one-on-one? Have you had time in silence to listen to God and actually ask Him to speak? Because it's taking those, like, I can be around my wife 24/7, right? But if I don't actually sit down and talk to her face to face, we can just be around each other, but that doesn't help grow the relationship. Actually carving out time, right?
I was going to offer that as an analogy that it's like, oh yeah, we're just, side by side. We're doing all the things that we need to. That's our relationship. I'm like, I don't think that's going to fly with my wife.
Yeah.
A good practice and is to take one day this week, and from when you wake up in the morning to when you go down, lay down at night, is to write down what you've done all day.
Yeah,
I guarantee you, you're going to find time for prayer there. I guarantee you're going to find time for prayer. The other issue I find is not so much a time, and I do find priority and time.
Yeah.
Like if we're prioritizing our spiritual life, like it's easy just to scroll through the cell phone and find rest, if you will.
Yeah.
But if we're consciously saying, like, like you get that feeling, it's like, ooh, I'm hungry, I haven't eaten anything all day or something like that, or whatever. It's like, we should sense that in our spiritual life. We should say, ooh, I'm missing something right now.
Yeah.
I haven't given myself time for prayer. So that's one thing, the priority thing. The other thing I'm going to suggest when we look at our life in preparation for Lent is what effect is the things that we're involved in doing to our life. It's what effect is it having on our life? Because we're talking about sort of things that people do with their time. Let's even say, like, to relax, I'm going to sit down and read a book.
Yeah.
Okay. What book are you reading?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to crack open the Bible every time you open up a book. Because some people think, like, well, I can't read certain type of books because the church says that they're bad.
Yeah.
Right. I would suggest that any book that leads you to a near occasion of sin is probably not best for you.
Yeah.
Like,
Good call.
like for example, I'm going to say there are types of people who have control over they're prayerful, they're controlled. And let's say someone who lust isn't an issue for, okay?
Yeah.
Like, that's not an area of weakness in their life.
Okay.
They read not like an extreme romantic novel,
No, but there's
but
a little
they just read a
something.
little romantic novel and they appreciate for what it is and they continue on with their life. Then there are people who lust is an issue.
Yeah.
And they read a romantic novel and now they're like hot and bothered.
And they're thinking about
And
it.
they're thinking about it,
yeah.
and it leads them to sin.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I think we need to become more aware of in our life.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like there are clear boundaries when it comes to, like, certain books are not good to read. Certain movies, I would say the same thing. Okay.
It's true.
Some people say, like, oh gosh, I was watching this television series or this movie. It was rated TV 14 or whatever the ratings are now. And all of a sudden there was this brief sex scene, and I thought, like, oh, what am I doing watching this? And I got to run off to confession now, and whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I would say again, for some people, that would be enough to lead to a near occasion of sin. Yeah. So we have to avoid those sort of movies. Someone who has who has sort of a and I'm not saying it's okay to watch like nude scenes or things like that, right? But I think we have to become more aware of what we're taking in, and how it's affecting our life. Not so much like, there's extremes. People say like Harry Potter is no good, and Harry Potter's the devil, and all these different things. Like it's hard to say, but I think when it comes down to it, if we're measuring our life of discipleship, and we're saying how is what I'm doing in my spare time affecting my relationship, my spiritual life, my relationship with Jesus, this is a good measure. This is a good way of seeing like what's good, a good use of my time, and what's not.
I think it's really funny because one of the things that I realized, this is something that's I've realized in my own life, is when we did Exodus 90 a couple of years back. Not watching TV is a big thing. No screen, no unnecessary screen time. And one of the things that I realized, and I didn't realize how much watching screens at certain times of the day affected me until I used to watch Mythbusters all the time. And so this is not a bad show at all, and I think a fun, scientific, entertaining show. But watching that, what I realized was I went off and I didn't watch any TV for 90 days. And then we had, I got back on, and the very first thing I did was watch, I'm really excited. I'm going to watch one of the episodes of Mythbusters. And as I sat down to watch it, all of a sudden I started feeling really hungry. And I realized that I watch a lot of times when I was using Mythbusters in the kitchen to prepare food and to eat. A lot of times I got home late at night and I hadn't eaten, and so I'd be watching Mythbusters as I ate. It was like a Pavlov dog.
Pavlovian response.
Your self-conditioning.
It really was. Yeah. But so watching certain shows was getting me in a very specific mood. But I think that's like throughout the whole entire thing. One of the things is when I'm watching certain murder mystery documentaries, and this is not a bad thing necessarily, but it is. The conditioning is I realized I was watching them because they were addictive in a way. Mm-hmm. And so I was only letting myself watch them when I was running on the treadmill or on the elliptical runner. And what I realized was I allowed myself after years to start watching one of these things. And as I watched it, I had this desire to exercise. And I was like, well, that's weird. I don't feel that very often. But the idea being that, again, you don't realize how much these and I don't want to say vices because, again, that's almost a guilt feeling too. But like that the screen time and stuff has an effect on what you're doing or how you're doing or and I only realized, again, as a Pavlov dog's response of these are the specific episodes that I watch or things that I watch when I'm doing certain activities, and they're driving me towards not necessarily bad. You got to eat and you got to exercise, but like realizing this screen time had such a strong effect on me.
So how you spend your time,
yeah,
right? Lots of activities that you can spend your time. Movies, film, social media,
video games,
books, video games, or there's more social things, and how you spend your resources too, how you spend your money, okay? So if people look at that too, if they're going out all the time, spending to restaurants, if that's their thing, but spending money at restaurants is not a bad thing. But when you're spending money or going to the movies or
theater or whatever,
but if those things are now putting in jeopardy, taking care of what belongs to you, then that's a whole other issue. People going out for entertainment, going out to the bar for a drink, not a bad thing. If you're always at the bar, it's taking up your time. That's a different story. Or if you need 15, 20 drinks to have a good time rather than 2 or 3 or 4, that's a different story. Someone mentioned dancing before we went on the air. People say, well, Catholics shouldn't dance. Well, what is the purpose of our dancing?
Exactly. Why are we dancing?
And I would say there's appropriate dancing and there's inappropriate dancing.
Yeah,
there's dancing to enjoy people's time, and there's a time and place for dancing.
Yeah.
And then there's dancing that's inappropriate.
Exactly.
Things that are, dancing that's getting a little too close or too...
dancing you can do with your grandmother, and dancing you wouldn't want to do with your grandmother.
Sure.
Yeah. But there's a fine line there.
Yeah.
Right? So
but I think it all comes down to is like, as disciples of Jesus, how are we looking at what we're doing in our life, whether it's our time or money, and how are we going to adjust that to make sure that our priority here is to glorify God in everything. So how do we glorify God in dancing? It's not taking advantage of the person we're dancing with and objectifying them.
Exactly.
It's maybe celebrating a wedding we're at and we're dancing with family and friends or someone you love or whatever like
Or
that.
learning a new
in
dance
wholesome
move,
way,
a
or
dance-
learning
yeah,
dance
dancing,
techniques
yeah,
or whatever it is.
ballroom or whatever.
Yeah, so there's so many things that I think if we just put the lens on it of is what I'm doing glorifying the Lord, or even is what I'm doing helpful for my spiritual life, So video games, not a bad idea. Video games for 5 hours, probably a bad idea. So
Yeah, and I think too that there's a tendency to paint with broad strokes and to curate our Lent in a way that isn't necessarily forcing us to grow or to challenge us spiritually. So we're talking about Exodus 90, and there's an emphasis on screen time bad.
Yeah.
So you need to find more edifying things to do with your time. Okay, so one of the requirements is like don't watch TV for 90 days. I don't watch a lot of TV. So just like that was something that I could feel self-congratulatory about and be like, yeah, I'm doing Exodus 90 well. But any behavior, any hobby, and can become self-indulgent. So you're saying like with dancing, like there's an acceptable form of dancing, there's a self-indulgent form of dancing, but you'll get these people who's like, okay, for Lent, no screen time. Okay, you can read books. You're like, well, there are a lot of self-indulgent books out there as well.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody's sitting down, look, people aren't going to read something like 50 Shades of Grey, but like as an extreme example, that it's like it's not just books good. Screen's bad.
bad, yes.
And it's I'm going to give up sweets that I wouldn't eat anyway, and murdering people for Lent. Like it's just like if it's something that is not causing you to grow, and again having that couple of weeks time horizon to really evaluate where am I spending my time? Yeah. What are the things that I'm struggling with? Like what are some of the near occasions that I could really just would benefit me to just kind of eradicate from my life because it's either standing in the way of spiritual growth. It's there's a temptation to maybe find the easy path that looks good.
Yeah.
But again, looking at any of these hobbies, looking at any of these things we do for rest or things we do for leisure. Again, if there's really examine, is there a self-indulgent aspect to this? Can I take Lent as an opportunity to really weed this out?
We allowed in our, which I kind of like, was again, and this is on the same line of twisting what it's used for to the good, if that makes sense. And so one of the things we did this for Advent, actually. We gave something out for Advent, and that was screen time. Specifically, they weren't allowed, my kids and us, most of my kids, aren't allowed to watch any screens, and that, makes us suffer more than anybody else. But they weren't allowed, except if we watched it together as a family. Now, it wasn't so hard to get me to watch TV with them because I enjoy my TV. But I have 4 teenage boys. So what they want to watch and what I want to watch always kind of falls into the same thing. But my wife doesn't watch hardly any TV. And that was a whole other ball game, trying to get her like something that she wants to be that, wants to watch and everything else. So we ended up watching things like The Chosen, and it was a really good opportunity. So we would sit down. It wasn't all the time. It was like a Friday night, and everybody's home, and there's not really anything going on. It's coming into winter, so it's like really, stormy outside or something. So what are you going to do? Well, we're all going to sit around and read. Or we're going to play video games. It's not video games. We're going to play board games together. Or we're going to bake. Or we're going to, we're going to sit down and watch The Chosen together. So what we're doing is now we're changing this time. Because like you suggested, like it could be that we're all sitting around reading. Again, reading's not inherently bad either, but we could actually be spending this time as a family because we don't half the time I'm at work, my wife's at work, the kids are at school. Like we don't spend a lot of time together. And sometimes just sitting around the same couches, reading is okay. You know what I mean? But a lot of times if you just fall into that path and you just replace screen time with just reading. No, but what we're really trying to do here is cut out the screen time, make relationships. So now we start twisting what we're doing as a family for relationship and growing together and spending time together. And sometimes that is a form of prayer. Like we took up this year specifically was the first Saturdays because we were, okay, you know what, we're going to spend some more time as a family. We're going to take it. So our first Saturday is like our whole day almost is encompassed into this first Saturday tradition. Anyways. And so it's a cool little taking on these things or I'm going to say warping them for the good. Is interesting.
Or finding the well-ordered version
Exactly.
of the things that you do for leisure and for rest.
Yeah.
And so the three themes for Lent are prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So while we're looking at our time, while we're looking at where we spend our resources, let's use those three categories, because the scriptures talk about prayer, fasting, and almsgiving like
All the time.
like a remedy for
Anything.
overcoming anything, right? So let's try and increase our prayer. If that means we got to look at our schedule, that means we got to look at our schedule. If that means we got to look at our where we're using our time to increase our prayer. And I don't like saying time for prayer. I don't think there's a quota of prayer everyone has to meet each day. I think that confuses people too. Like, it doesn't mean you have to spend 2 hours in prayer every day.
No, yeah.
Right? But it means that you have to make a significant time for you to dedicate to God each day.
Yeah.
And whether that looks like reading the scriptures, whether that's silent time, silent reflection, whether that's whatever it might be. Maybe it's heading to the church for adoration if it's available near you.
Playing an instrument and praise and worship music, or like whatever.
And like these things, I think are really important for us to really connect with the Lord. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be substantially lengthy, But the measure is like we wouldn't measure the time we speak to our spouse.
Yeah.
Right? So for people to say like, well, I'm not going to start praying now because I don't have an hour. It is like saying, well, I'm not going to speak to my wife till after work because I don't have time right now on my way to work or whatever it is. So I think that the idea of time is wrong, but to make time for prayer and then fasting. Let's fast from something that's overtaking our time, that's taking our attention away from prioritizing God in our life, ordering things to the good, right? And then almsgiving. Let's look at our resources. Are we spending all of our money on fast food? Are we spending all of our money at the casino? Are we spending all of our money wherever? And can we reorder how we're spending our resources? And can we give to something that's ordered for the good? Give to our parish, give to a charity, give to that is ordered towards the good, whatever it might be. Let's start thinking about it now. We're 13 days away from the season of Lent. So let's start making a plan. If all of us really reflect on our life and what we're doing, I always find that Lent comes at a great time every year. It's like a wake up call. It's like we kind of get in this like routine, and then it's like boom, you get smacked in the face by Lent, and you're like, oh. But it's so good because the fruits of Lent are amazing. Yeah. Like I truly sense that every year at Easter is a real celebration because I can see a difference in my spiritual life. I can see a difference in what fruit that I've received, the graces I've received during Lent has made a different an impact on my life. Right. So I hope that's the case for all people. So maybe with 2 weeks away from Lent, maybe people can share your ideas. You can drop a comment here on this episode. You can share this episode with others, or you could drop us a line and ask us at thecatholicbuzz.com. So let's prepare for Lent well together. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.